Welcome to The Journey, a podcast to help you be the very best parent you can be. We are thrilled you are here and that we get to do life together. We are here to serve your family, and we're thankful you're joining us on The Journey.
Hey parents, welcome back to The Journey. This is Dan Panetti. I've got a good friend, Ryan Bangert, and Ryan's a great guy because he hits on so many different levels. One, he's a former PCA parent, but he's also one of the brightest guys that I know. He's an attorney. He's now working for Alliance Defending Freedom, and he's their Senior Vice President for Strategic Initiatives and Special Counsel to the President, which is amazing and wonderful. He's clerked for Higginbotham on the 5th. He's worked for a bunch of different state attorney generals. And so now he's, back down in Austin and doing his thing. And we love talking to Ryan every once in a while. I remember the last time we chatted was after the Dobbs decision came out, and just kind of what's that mean for the, pro-life initiative. And from a parent standpoint, we want to know, how should we evaluate this? You just recently got to be a part of the National Religious Broadcasters. They had a little, session where they were talking about free speech and freedom of religion, with good friends, Matt Staver and Kelly Shackelford. So I'm sure that was a fantastic time for you. But that kind of got me thinking about, some of the things that are going on. And I know when we're in the United States, we think the Constitution will protect us, free speech, religious liberties. And so when I hear things like a guy who's in, I think it was in England, that got arrested for quietly praying or silently praying outside of an abortion clinic, right? We look at that, Ryan, and we just say, listen, none of that's going to happen here in America. But there are things to be concerned about, right? And so just from your perspective, what are some things that are going on that we need to be paying attention to? Maybe some cases that the Supreme Court has taken, or maybe just some, waves that are coming along that we just need to pay attention to and say, hey, we need to be on the lookout for this. So talk to our parents. Where do we start?
Hey, Dan, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And a shout out to my Prestonwood parent family. I was there for years, love Prestonwood, love PCA. What a wonderful place, and just so many good memories from my time there in Plano. And of course, getting to know you and working with you and the Prestonwood School Board. So just wonderful to be back with the family here. But like you said, there are some really interesting trends that are taking place all across the world right now in the space of freedom of speech and religious freedom. And I'll start with the case that you led with, which is the case of Adam Smith Connor. Adam is a veteran of the UK Army. He is a man who lives in the United Kingdom. He and his girlfriend tragically years ago made the decision to abort their unborn son. And he has since come to regret that decision. And he decided to pray on the public sidewalk outside of the abortion clinic where that happened. And as he was praying, he was approached by law enforcement, and they asked him what he was doing. And he was silently praying. He was not vocally praying. It was a silent prayer in his mind. And he told them, I'm praying. And he was arrested and prosecuted for that, for violating the UK buffer zone law. Now, imagine that. That is actually a thought crime. They prosecuted him for a thought crime. And this is almost like out of 1984 or, George Orwell. How on earth can this happen? But yet it did. And interestingly, J.D. Vance, Vice President Vance, called that case out specifically during his speech to EU leaders in Munich just a week ago, and pointed to it as an example of how nations in Europe that formerly honored free speech rights were beginning to lose their way. But he also mentioned that these things are happening in the United States too. And there are several examples, lest we forget that freedom of speech is a delicate and precious right, always in need of defense. And we do have the First Amendment, which is a great blessing that the nations of Europe do not have, but we have to defend it. We have a republic if you can keep it, and the keeping it is what we have to do. And so a few examples from the past 4 years, if you look at what happened during the COVID pandemic, there was a case that came out of Louisiana in which a number of different civil rights groups, as well as attorneys general, got involved in a lawsuit against the White House after it came to light that officials, highly ranked, highly placed officials in the White House, were leaning on social media companies like YouTube and Meta to deplatform and to erase messages that contradicted the government's line on COVID including masking mandates and vaccine mandates and shutdown and close down orders. Is an egregious example of what they call jawboning in the law, the government using its power and leverage to try to force private actors to engage in censorship on behalf of the government. Now, that case, as it turns out, the court found that the plaintiffs lacked standing because they found that these private media companies, there was no direct evidence that the private media companies took the actions they took because of the jawboning by the government. Now, imagine that, of course. If you get a call from the White House that says, "We don't like this post on your platform," what are you going to do? Exactly. You're going to take it down. It's very difficult to say no to City Hall. So there are instances here in the U.S. where we have to be concerned about freedom of speech.
Yeah, very, very true. And I know that, we paid attention, obviously, during COVID to that. And a lot of people that woke them up, right? Because, the idea is, we want to pursue truth. We want to be able to have conversations. And, when those social media companies were taking down posts, and it was very difficult to find out, true information. And even though, conspiracy theories, right? It's like, let the conspiracy theory run, right? If it's not true, it'll run itself out. But the idea that government would come in and shut down things by using private companies to do it was really kind of a scary concept. So it's kind of like you have this, this source in front of you that you can use, and the government can hide behind it. And it was like, whoa, that's something we really do need to pay attention to, because the First Amendment really protects us from government intrusion, but it doesn't protect us from companies doing that. And that's one of the things that we've always fought to protect, is that companies do have a right to refuse business, right? That a person has a right not to bake the cake for the same-sex marriage that they don't want to go to. And so that COVID really brought up a lot of different tensions for us in how to best understand, what these things look like. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. Is there anything else that's going on currently that you're looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. You're sort of going through a greatest hits of ADF cases. You mentioned Adam Smith Connor, who's one of our clients in the UK, and of course the cake baking case was Jack Phillips. Actually, Jack recently had a big win at the Colorado Supreme Court.
No way.
It or not, he has now been sued not one, not two, but three times over various requests that have been lodged. And the third case was one that I actually had the privilege of trying at the trial court level, along with some of my friends at ADF, as well as Sean Gates, a lawyer out in California. But he was sued by a man who identified as a woman and requested that Jack bake a cake, create a cake that celebrated this man's gender transition. And I put scare quotes around that gender transition. The cake was going to be blue on the outside with blue icing, but pink on the inside. And he said this represented who he was as a person. I'm a man on the outside, but I'm really a woman on the inside. And Jack, of course, said, well, I can't create that cake for the same reasons that I couldn't create the cake for the same-sex wedding, because it contradicts my understanding of God's created order and my biblical understanding of truth. And of course, he was sued for that. And we had to take that case all the way to the Colorado Supreme Court, which thankfully, by God's grace, ended up dismissing the case against Jack. But the fact is, he had to endure years of lawfare to get to that point, and more damage to his business and more damage to his ability to run it. And so that's just one example of many.
Isn't that the first time that you guys have won in Colorado? Because usually you lost in Colorado and had to go to the Supreme Court. So it's almost like we're making progress.
We'll take whatever wins we can get. I mean, I think they saw the writing on the wall after the 303 creative case, which is another ADF case that we brought out of Colorado on behalf of Lori Smith, who's a creative artist, owns a website. She runs a company that does online creative content. And she refused to create websites. She declined to create websites for same-sex weddings, was sued, very similar type of claim that was lodged against Jack Phillips. And we had to take that case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, where the court vindicated Lori Smith's rights under the First Amendment. So you see over and over again these instances where the state is trying to leverage the law to silence those who have dissenting viewpoints. And there's a good example of that right now is a case out in Colorado, two cases in Colorado that ADF is prosecuting against Gavin Newsom, the governor of Colorado, who famously declared that he was going to be leading the resistance against President Trump after the election back in November. But he signed into law 2 bills that deal with online satire and parody. He'd seen online, there was a post on X by a guy named Mr. Reagan USA. And Mr. Reagan USA had posted an AI-generated post that mocked and sort of satirized Kamala Harris's campaign announcement, but it used AI to do a voiceover in Kamala Harris's voice, but obviously was saying things that she didn't really say, that were humorous and funny and somewhat biting. And Gavin Newsom said, well, we can't have that in Colorado. We have to stamp this out. So he signs a law, says if you're going to create online satire and parody using AI, that to generate content that otherwise wasn't created by or wasn't said by these candidates and political office holders, you have to slap a giant disclaimer on it that says this is satire and parody in the largest font used, otherwise used in the content. Which of course, there's nothing less funny and less satirical than a satire that has in 50-point font running across the face of the video, this is satire, don't believe the word of it. I mean, that ruins the point, right? So we sued Gavin Newsom on behalf of the Babylon Bee, which of course is a content creator, and Rumble, which hosts similar content, challenging the law under the First Amendment. So that's just another example of individuals in government who want to leverage the power of government to stamp out messages with which they don't agree.
Yeah, well, this will be interesting to see as we go into AI, because you and I both have seen a little bit about what AI can do, and it is crazy. It is hard, literally almost impossible to see the difference between what is real, right, and what is make believe and made up through AI. Just in these digital pictures and our voices, right? You can literally take my voice, right, use it, run it through AI, and it's my voice, right, saying things that I didn't say. And so our Constitution, right, I know there's people look at it and it's like it's a really old document, and so is it prepared to withstand the challenges that things like new technology, and where's the freedom of speech going to come in when it's protecting things that I didn't actually say, and is it going to protect me as the person who's the originator and what I say, or is it going to protect the person's right to create things that I say? And so that'll be an interesting challenge moving forward. I'm glad that the court is set as the way it is right now, because we want people who have kind of that original jurisdiction, originalist intent to go back and say, what would the framers, right, intend in this? And so that'll be an interesting concept. I am a little concerned about LGBTQ issues as they try to insert, right, that particular philosophy, right, especially in the public school, right, and parents are beginning to push back on that and saying, no, this isn't something from a sex education standpoint that we want our kids to be under. And so free speech, religious freedom in that regard, do you see some cases on that as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in fact, you just look at what's come out of the Trump administration during the first month. You'll see executive orders that push back on a lot of this indoctrination that was happening at the K through 12 level, pushing back on what Biden did with Title IX, which is a sex discrimination statute that affects education, K through 12 education, as well as colleges and universities, basically saying, look, the Biden administration had tried to redefine the word sex in the federal government's core sex discrimination statute in education to mean gender identity. And President Trump thankfully issued an executive order in the first week that said that is not the correct interpretation of the word sex. Sex means biological sex, male and female, based on biology. And that's exactly right. That's exactly how the framers intended it. I think it's inarguable that when the Constitution was framed back in the 18th century, no one was contemplating that sex would mean gender identity. And yet we have seen that sort of interpretation be propounded in our public schools. And one of the most concerning places we've seen it is through a practice that has come to be known as secret gender transitions. This is a policy that's been adopted by a number of public schools across the nation, whereby teachers are told if there is a student in your care, a student in your classroom, who decides to identify with a gender other than their biological sex, you're to accommodate that, begin using whatever pronouns the student requests. If they choose to dress in a different way, or sometimes even use different facilities, restroom facilities, locker room facilities, you're to honor that. And moreover, you're not to tell the parents. You're not to tell the parents unless the student gives you express permission. And of course, oftentimes the student is experimenting, is trying to do this outside the view of their parents. And so permission is not given. And then teachers are left in a quandary. When they're speaking with parents, they're not allowed to share this critical information that parents need to know about their child. And moreover, the teacher is now complicit in this process. And so we've brought lawsuits on a number of teachers. We've brought lawsuits on behalf of parents to whom this has happened with their child. And it's really shocking, though, to see just how blithely this practice has become accepted in the public school system all across the country. We have a case in Michigan, we have a case in Colorado, cases in Virginia, a case in Kansas recently. So it's even in states where you wouldn't expect this to be taking place, but it's become commonplace. And teachers are really feeling the bite. Parents need to be aware. You have to be on your toes. You need to be talking with your children, especially if your kids are in a public school. Obviously, that's not this audience, but if you have friends whose kids are in public schools, they need to be aware of what's happening with their kids, because in many of these schools, there is no policy that requires, in fact, the policy is just the opposite. It requires teachers not to share information about what's happening with children who are struggling with gender identity crises. And that's a real problem.
Yeah, and I know one of the earliest cases is about a mom who this happened to her daughter. The daughter went through this particular issue. The mom, never knew, never found out. The daughter actually committed suicide, and the mom was just, dumbstruck. Like, how did this happen? Why wasn't I informed? Why wasn't I told? And that's the concept is, that the school really in this particular regard is acting as the parent. Right. In loco parentis is the whole idea is you just can't step in and take over the parental rights. Right. I mean, that's my son. That's my daughter. So if they're dealing with something, right, I need to know about it and I need to get them help. And even if that help is something that you disagree with, right, that's my job as a parent, and it's not the school's job. And so that's a huge issue that's going on right now. And I as you said, it's not going on at PCA, and it's a reason that a lot of parents are looking to PCA. Right, we look at a biblical understanding of God, designed in terms of gender and sexuality. Right, God designed male and female, and so we're going to uphold that and we're going to enforce that. But so many people are fearful of the public school system and what they have the power to do, because the public school system is the state, right? And it has the state's power to enforce that. And so when parents run into that, the state backing of that, that school counselor or that teacher who refuses to give them information, parents have found out, like, that's a wall you can't get over. And it's a difficult process for parents to go through.
It is. Well, it's also important to note, because it's the state, it is subject to the requirements of the U.S. Constitution and federal law. And we've had the privilege of representing a number of parents and teachers in these types of challenges. And what we have argued, and I think to some good effect, is on the behalf of the teachers, these requirements that they lie to parents, that they speak words about their students that are untrue, violates their First Amendment rights. And then on behalf of parents, you mentioned parental rights, a very important concept. Number of cases out of the U.S. Supreme Court that have recognized that parents do have a fundamental constitutional right to direct the upbringing, the care, and the formation of their children. And that's something that the state cannot override, notwithstanding the fact, as you mentioned earlier, that when children are at schools, public schools, the school acts in loco parentis. That doesn't override the fundamental rights of parents to direct these core aspects of their children's formation and upbringing. And I can think of very few things more central than the medical and mental health care of children and the way that children live out and express who they are, and a concept of gender identity. I mean, this is something that parents absolutely have a fundamental right to speak into. And the fact that schools are denying them that right, we believe, violates the Constitution. And we've made that argument several times.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things, I keep up with this because of, my background. I love, law, politics, but a number of parents, are probably just overwhelmed, right? They're listening, to our conversation and they're just like, oh my goodness, there's so many different things, so many different cases, so many different challenges to freedom of religion and free speech. Is there a way that parents, I know, ADF is an amazing organization. The work that you guys do there is fantastic. And it's awesome for people who are currently in a situation, right? Getting an ADF attorney is awesome. For law students going through there, right, you've got your Blackstone fellowship and all the different things that you're doing. But let's just talk to the average parent out there who says, how do I keep track of these things? What do I need to know? Is there a place that I can go to that kind of digest some of the information for me? And then what can I be praying for? I know Scripture tells us to pray for our leaders, and I think that's such an important reminder. And you've talked about it. Who you put in leadership, who you vote for the different offices, right? And we're not just talking federal; we're talking state and local as well. That is so important in the enforcement of these particular laws and which bills are going to get passed, right? Our legislature in Texas is in session right now, and a number of things that they're looking at working on are addressing these particular issues. And so, it's so important to stay informed so that you can go to the ballot box and you can put people in that are going to protect your parental rights, that are going to protect free speech. But what else would you tell parents? Is there a place that they can go and get information? Is there a resource for them?
Absolutely. I mean, I would always send parents to adflegal.org, which is our
Mm.
main website and contains a number of resources that will equip parents with information about the cases that we're trying. There's a number of different case pages that deal with these various issues, and we have pages dedicated to parental rights and freedom of speech. So that's a great place to start. We also, I would encourage, when you said, what can parents pray for? I think there's nothing more important right now than to be actively engaged in praying for our nation, our leaders, but also praying for the church. This is a time when I think institutions have an opportunity to deepen their roots and to be built. And the prayer that I would offer for the church is, Lord, let the church be grounded and rooted on your truth. There's really nothing more pernicious than churches that embrace lies and that are teaching lies. And so biblical orthodoxy, biblical truth being expressed through churches, places like Prestonwood, other faithful churches that are actually just preaching the word of God. Pray that churches stay rooted and grounded on truth, and that people find their way to those churches, because as much as we are celebrating some of the wins that are happening right now at the federal level, and there have been a lot of really refreshing things coming out of the Trump administration, we also know that ultimately politics is not our savior. It
Right.
can't right the wrongs of the world, and we misplace our hope in politics if that's what we're hoping for. But we can always place our trust in the sovereign God of the universe, and He works through His body, which is the church. And I think first and foremost, pray that the church, in this moment, in this season, where we have freedom, where we have the opportunity to speak truth into culture, that the church is grounded on biblical truth, and that the people in the churches and the pews are receiving that biblical truth and carrying that forward into culture and society, because nothing in this nation is going to turn around. Nothing's going to be set right if the church is not first and foremost grounded on biblical truth. And so that's my prayer, and I would just invite your listeners to make that their prayer as well.
Yeah, that's so good. That is the point, right? Is that politics will ebb and flow. Politicians and leaders come and go, but the church is the thing that Christ has said that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So we need to continue to do that. I was just thinking about, right, you as an ADF attorney, right? Our good friend, another ADF attorney, is up at the Speaker of the House right now. So Mike Johnson, he was on staff with Alliance Defending Freedom for a number of years as well. So it's great to see good people doing good work and being placed in positions, not only through people voting for them, but also through God's providence of just having the right people at the right time to really, continue to protect these freedoms and to stand for truth. And so, Ryan, I'll just say this, right? Just good job. Keep up the good work. Continue to fight hard. And we just tremendously appreciate you, one of our, PCA parents who's not here anymore, but you're down in Austin doing some great work. And so just keep it up, and we'll be praying for you, Ryan Bangert.
Thank you, Dan, and much love to my PCA family.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Journey. We hope this podcast provides information to help you raise your children, and it would help us tremendously if you would like, subscribe, share, and review this content on your favorite podcast platform. It is our pleasure to provide this information to our community, and we look forward to our next time together on The Journey.